everybody, so this is my first process video and I'm going to be making a 1-layer card using these 2 stamp sets from the Greeting Farm. I'm going to be making a Veterans Day card, and I'm going to start with a piece of Neenah Solar white card base. And I'm going to be using my MISTI so that I can line up all my images and stamp them more than once if I have to. So this is a bit of a tedious process for me, just because I have not made too many of the single layer cards. So I'm just fiddling with the placement of the characters. I'm going to stamp the images using my Memento Tuxedo Black ink because I'm going to be using my Copic markers to color the images. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp these 2 guys twice because I want a really crisp outline of the images. I'm trying to figure out if I can put a 3rd character, but on the example that I showed in the beginning, I didn't put 3 characters, and so I think I just figure out I won't have room because of all the components I want to add to the card. However, I totally could have put the 3rd character on there and it would have been just fine. I think it almost would have looked better, but it's a process, and I'm learning, and I'll know next time. So I'm using the masks that I created for these images, and I just used some post-it notes, and I cut them, fussy cut them with scissors. I'm placing the buildings in the back of the characters, and to get the perspective of a 3D look on a single layer card, you want to stagger your images because you don't want everything in line. You kind of want things in the background, things in the foreground, and to do that, the images you want in the foreground, you want to stamp first, mask them, and then stamp things in the back. So I'm just placing where I want the buildings to go, and I'm gonna again use the Memento Tuxedo Black ink and stamp them out. And I lost part of the footage there. I don't know what happened. The kids were driving me nuts and I was trying to finish and so on and so forth. And anyway, you can figure out from the rest of the video what I did. And I'm basically still trying to line up my images and place them where I want to and stamp out the images. So right here I'm just stamping out the trees, and I think my original thought was to put the trees in the back of the buildings, and so that's why I've got those buildings masked, and then I go ahead and mask the rest of my images because I want to do some distress ink blending and create a nice cloud scene in the back. But before I do that, I realized I have not stamped my flag, and I wanted the flag there because this card is for Veterans Day that we just celebrated last week, and I had planned to give this card to my father-in-law who was a Air Force veteran. So I go ahead and stamp out my flag, and I'm going to draw out the flagpole since I did not have a stamp for that, which is fine. You could just draw it out with a pencil or sketch it out with a pencil and then just line it out with some marker that is Copic friendly or whatever it is, whatever medium you're planning to use. Just make sure the marker is not going to bleed, because I have had that happen. Again, live and learn. So I go ahead and I draw it out with pencil, and then I erase it for whatever reason. I I did erase it this time. Generally, I don't. I just go over it with my black marker. And the marker I'm using is EK Tools. And it's just a black journaling pen. It comes in a set of 5 with different thicknesses that you can use. And I have not had any problems with that marker bleeding. And I tend to fiddle around a lot with my projects. I have to like put them at a distance, look at them, bring them close. It's just me. So you'll see a lot of that in this video. So I'm using just a piece of scrap. I think it's from like a notebook, the binding that tends to have that slick surface. So I'm using that underneath to protect my surface, and I'm gonna be using the My Favorite Things stencil, or the cloud stencil. I should have taped down my card so that it would not shift. However, I did not, and I get a little bit of shifting in the beginning, and then I figure it out how to eventually move past that. So I should have used a bigger stencil, but I didn't. And there is a spot in the card that I try to cover up later, because I made a mistake, and I think this is it right here. But again, live and learn. Nobody's gonna notice that but me. So I'm gonna just finish out creating the cloud background, and I'm using Distress Oxide inks. I believe this is Salty Ocean. It creates a really nice background. And then I'm going to be using, again, Distress Oxides, and this time I'm going to be using the Twisted Citron to create the grass. And I'm just going to put a piece of scratch paper there to kind of mask off the part that I don't want to get my ink on. And if you look closely at my card right now, my characters are floating in the sky, and I realize I made a mistake. Even my buildings are floating in the sky. But that's okay, because, you know, I figure it out and I correct that mistake in a little bit, and it's just one of those things. So I'm taking all the masks off, and I tend to reuse my masks. I've done a card like this a couple of times, and so I was able to reuse those masks. So I'll just put those in a nice little folder and just save them for another project. And I'm not a Copic marker expert, so my coloring is pretty basic. I use 2 to 3 shades per image or per section to color. So I think some of it I lost the footage again. The kids didn't help. And I think at one point I ran out of the battery. At one point I ran out of my light went out of battery. And so I just took all that footage out because I'm really not an expert on Copic coloring, and a lot of this card is just coloring once the background is done. So I'll have all the markers listed that I used on my blog, but I create a sidewalk using some of the cool gray markers, and I just go over it a couple of times. I generally start with my lightest color and work my way kind of to the darker. However, I think this time I didn't, and I liked the way it turned out, so it was fine. And I just keep layering the shadows for that sidewalk. So once that is done, I'm going to be, I think at this point I realize, oops, my buildings are floating and my tree is floating. It's all in the sky. Oh, still working on the sidewalk. I told you I'm a little bit particular when it comes to the way I create my cars. I gotta look at it again, make sure all is good. And I think I realize now, my buildings are floating, or some of them are floating. I guess not yet. So I start to color in all my images with their skin tones. And I realize my card is, I'm not focused, I'm not zoomed in as much as I should be, so you could see the coloring. But again, I'll have some still shots at the end of the video, and I'll also have still shots, close-ups of my finished card on my blog, which will also include a list of the Copic colors I used. So you can check that out if you're interested. I think this is where I realize my buildings are floating. Yep, there it is. Oops. Well, now we're gonna mask those guys all off again and try to fix that. Which I try to add like a piece of grass again, a strip of grass with my distress inks. And I think I just struggled a little bit with getting it just right, and it was, some of the green was mixing with the blue, and I think in the end I just used my Copic markers and I shaded in a little bit of the grass, and it looks perfectly fine. You would never know that I left my buildings and my trees in the sky. And so again, I bring out the same Distress Oxide ink that I used for the bottom portion of the grass, and I should have taped those papers down to hold it, but you know, I didn't. And then I think I finally figured out how to hold two papers at once and ink blend the background. There it is. I figured it out. And at this point I was like, we'll just use Copic colors to color that in. Nobody will be the wiser. So I pick some of the lighter green in the yellow-green family, and I just add shades here and there, and I think I do some of the what is it called? Oh my gosh. well, there's part of the footage lost, so I finished up the grass at this point, and now I've also finished up coloring the buildings in the background. And I did not do any shading of the buildings. I just used it was actually a bright red color, and then I muted it with one of the grays, one of the cool gray colors, because I want the buildings in the background to remain in the background. I didn't want a lot of color. So I'm just using some of my green markers and brown markers, and it's really the dark greens that I'm using, and I think a shade of the in the E family that I'm using to get this camouflage effect. And I did not stay in those lines. This particular image has like the outline of where the camouflage color, different colors would meet. I just did my own thing. I dotted here and I dotted there, and I got the effect that I was going for very easily. You could color it the other way. There's nothing wrong with that, but I just chose not to. I colored outside of the lines, and that was okay. So I go ahead and I finish up this little girl's outfit, and I color in the boots, and I think I used like a dark gray, like a C9 to color in her boots. Yep, there's one of my kids saying hello. I'm not sure who it was. I'm not sure if it was my eldest or my youngest, but somebody said hello. There may be a spot later in the video where one of them sticks an eraser in front of the camera. Don't ask. It's okay. They like to help me when I'm coloring. And I think at this point I lost one of my lights, and I didn't really realize it until I was reviewing the footage, and it was just was not gonna record this whole thing all over again. This was a struggle. It was a struggle because this is all still a learning process for me. And so, you know, I'm struggling to understand how the video works and how editing works, and so hopefully as I progress through this process I will get better. And I will improve as time goes by. And so I'm just going to color this little guy's hair, and I think I'm doing a brown, like E family. And I'm still learning how to do a lot of the coloring and the techniques that sometimes you'll see used with alcohol marker coloring rather. But I think it turned out okay. I like the end result. And it's just laying down the lightest and then laying down the next darkest color, and then finally going over it with the darkest color. So I think I'm looking at it, trying to figure out what I'm going to color next. Maybe. I think maybe one of my kids distracted me, and there was some emergency I had to answer. I should have paused the video, but I didn't. And I didn't edit it out. And and I go ahead and I finish up coloring the trees, and I'm using some of my darkest greens that I have for the trees. And I go ahead and I kind of just, nothing fancy, I just dot 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 all the way across those trees just to give it a little bit of depth. And I'll just even all the harsh lines out with just a lighter color, which I think I actually edited that part out. By the end of this card, I think I had half of my markers out on the table. And this card required a lot of different, it had a lot of components, and it required a lot of different color combinations. I finished this little guy off by coloring his glasses, and I color them dark because I want them to be like black glasses. And I finished coloring the flagpole. And then we're going to move on to coloring the flag, I believe. Which I colored the stripes using 2 shades of red. And just 2 shades of blue. Evidently, part of that footage was lost as well. I'm telling you, the technical difficulties I had to record this video was unbelievable. But I persisted, and I got it done. So what was missed was the fact that I colored the flag, and I colored I just used 2 shades of red to color the flags, and I used 2 shades of blue to color the blue. And I think originally in the stamp of the flag, there's actual stars already outlined. And so I think in the beginning I was trying to go around the stars, and I was like, oh, this is just too tedious, and it's not happening. So I ended up covering the outline of the stars, and then I'm just using my white gel pen to go over and do some dots to create the stars again, because there was just no way I was gonna no. So I finish off the card, and I think what I don't show is the actual completion of the card. But I use a cream colored card base, which kind of matches the roofs of the building, and I finished that off just by placing my one layer on top of that with no dimension, and I stamped out the sentiment, "Land of the free because of the brave," and that completes that card. Real simple and real easy. And hopefully the next video I do, there won't be so many technical difficulties. But we'll just move on. Yeah, I think here, this is where I sort of messed up. Or it didn't help that I kept adding more color. And I'm just using one of the light blue just to kind of finish up some of the edges around the, the tiny details, that there's not this huge white spot. But I think that's it. That's the end of the card. Now I do decide to show how I stamped out the sentiment. For that sentiment, it came in the American Heroes stamp set, and I just used my Versa fine ink because I really wanted a nice dark bold sentiment. I wanted it to stand out against that background, which it did. And that's the end of my card. Thank you for watching. If you liked watching this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you again. Thanks for watching.